Hey everyone, before we dive into today's episode, I want to tell you about the latest upcoming event in Talking San Diego that you won't want to miss if you are in the vicinity. On Friday, March 21st, we'll be welcoming Maureen Dowd, the esteemed Pulitzer Prize winning New York Times columnist, for a conversation anchored in her new book, Notorious. For tickets and more information, visit talkingsandiego.net.
Anybody unhappy with Elon Musk? If you are, we'll throw him out of here. Is anybody unhappy?
Welcome to Talking Feds, a roundtable that brings together prominent former federal officials and special guests for a dynamic discussion of the most important political and legal topics of the day. I'm Harry Littman. Congress, well, to be precise, House Republicans took action this week, but the country might have been better off had they not. After a relentless pressure campaign from Speaker Mike Johnson, the Trump-endorsed budget plan squeaked through on a razor-thin 217 to 215 party line vote. The plan delivers on Trump's demands for yet more tax cuts for the wealthy, but at the staggering cost of slashing some $2 trillion from mandatory programs, including Medicaid, which Trump has repeatedly insisted would remain untouched. It funds this windfall and staves off a government shutdown in 2 weeks by piling on more than $4 trillion to the federal deficit. The House budget looks to be in serious jeopardy, if not outright dead on arrival in the Senate, and it remained unclear what legislative sleight of hand Republicans could possibly employ to muscle it through without a single Democratic vote. As the real-life impact of Trump's indiscriminate cuts to federal programs set in, and as public backlash grew against the outsized influence of constitutional question mark Elon Musk, Republican members of Congress found themselves confronted by angry crowds at town halls, which many of them just ducked. Meanwhile, the courts continued to rise to the challenge of the young administration's torrent of overreaching unlawful orders. An outraged Musk, echoing Trump's authoritarian impulses, suggested just removing federal judges who issue adverse rulings. One case, involving the administration's near total cutoff of USAID grants, made its way to the Supreme Court after the White House filed an emergency petition claiming it was simply incapable of complying with a district court order to promptly pay vendors for completed work. And in what was arguably the lowest moment of Trump's entire time as president, Trump savagely dressed down Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky before the press in an Oval Office meeting, a petty tirade that humiliated Ukraine on the world stage and sent shockwaves through long-standing geopolitical alliances. To assess the practical and political impact of the House budget vote and consider whether a popular pushback is beginning to take hold against the ever more crazy co-presidency of Trump and Musk, we welcome three of the country's sharpest commentators, Talking Fed stalwarts all. And they are: Tara Setmayer is the co-founder and CEO of the Seneca Project. Formerly, Tara was a CNN political commentator and Republican communications director on Capitol Hill. She is a resident scholar at the UVA Center for Politics, and her new Substack is called Uncompromised with Tara Setmayer. Welcome back to Talking Feds, Tara.
Always a pleasure.
Bob Shrum, a renowned Democratic strategist. He currently serves as the director of the Center for the Political Future at USC, which makes us kind of colleagues of a sort. He's a former political consultant working on numerous Democratic campaigns and senior advisor to the Kerry Edwards campaign, the Gore Lieberman campaign, and a general wise presence among Democratic politics for some 40 plus years. Bob, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
and Jacob Weisberg, executive chair and co-founder of Pushkin Industries, and previously, of course, CEO of the Slate Group, co-founder of Panoply, editor-in-chief of Slate Magazine, all hugely influential new media at the time projects. He's also the author of several books, has a new one possibly in the works that we won't make him talk about, and serves as chair of the Committee to Protect Journalists. Jacob, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Harry. I'm glad to be back.
Okay, so Mike Johnson and the Republican House passed, by the skin of their teeth, a fiscal plan that gives Trump more tax cuts for the wealthy, higher defense funding, but seems to require some $2 trillion cuts in mandatory programs, including Medicaid, though Trump assures the country it won't harm Medicaid, adds $4 to $4.5 trillion to fund all these things and not break the bank immediately. Let's take it first from Johnson's point of view. You know, it's 217 to 15, only one vote to spare. Lawmakers literally called back from their cars. Did you expect it to pass? And how big a kind of achievement is it for the speaker?
Well, I thought it was going to be a close vote. Democrats were all going to vote against it. But there were a number of Republicans who were bothered by it. The most conservative group, because they thought it didn't cut spending enough, and a lot of vulnerable or potentially vulnerable GOP members of Congress who were deeply concerned about these Medicaid cuts. And I mean, in some of these districts, 40% of the people benefit from Medicaid. I think what they did was pull people into the back room and say, we won't cut Medicaid. Don't worry about this. We just have an instruction to the Energy and Commerce Committee that they got to cut $800 billion. But it's actually impossible for the Energy and Commerce Committee to cut $800 billion without going into Medicaid and maybe Medicare. And Donald Trump is determined that he doesn't want to do that. He knows it's unpopular. It would be, I think, a disaster for Republicans in the midterm elections. So I don't believe that the budget framework that was passed by the House will actually be enacted in its present form. They may try a gimmick, by the way. They're thinking about not worrying about the offsets, the spending cuts, by saying, oh, we're just going to make the tax cuts permanent, and we don't have to count, since they're existing law, we don't have to count their impact on the deficit.
I mean, is the whole thing illusory? It sure doesn't. Lower taxes on the rich, big cuts historically for Medicaid, budget busting. What's good even for a GOP?
Harry, what I was going to say is, I mean, this is a vote yes if you believe in Ferry's budget, but it's, interestingly, it's a point of continuity for the Republicans, not a point of departure with Trump. This goes all the way back to Ronald Reagan's first budget. And some of us are old enough to remember David Stockman, who was, a principal conservative who tried to explain to President Reagan in his first term, you can't actually increase defense spending substantially, cut taxes substantially, and reduce the deficit. It is not possible, will not happen. And the Republicans since then, really, with some interruptions under the first George Bush, for example, have chosen to believe in this kind of make-believe. And there are lots of terms for it, the magic asterisk, or take things off budget or play with the baseline, but none of it affects the reality. And we know exactly what's going to happen. They are going to cut taxes, they are going to increase the deficit, and it's very unlikely that they take any serious stab at the spending that accounts for the biggest pieces of the budget. We know where it's going to end up. The only question is, can they sustain the 217 votes for the land of make-believe?
Well, I think the idea that this is really all an illusion, it's smoke and mirrors, is correct. They know, to Jacob's point, that they cannot possibly accomplish what they're promising and make everyone happy. It's just not possible. They're ignoring the fact that the deficit ballooned under Trump, and there's nothing conservative about that. When I was a Republican staffer, we went through these kind of exercises all the time under John Boehner and the Tea Party pressure with the fiscal conservatives during the Obama presidency. And there was a lot of, government shutdown talk. And that's how we got into this continuing resolution kind of loop all the time. We haven't passed budgets properly since the 90s, I don't think. And so this is all about political kabuki theater. And unfortunately, the messaging on this, it's very complicated to the average American. And MAGA and Donald Trump, they understand that. So they will throw out certain terms and they'll make it seem as though this is wonderful for everyone. And then when we have to explain how it's not, oftentimes people's eyes glaze over. We're talking about trillions and hundreds of billions, and the average American doesn't know it. They don't process that the same way that us political nerds do. But all they hear is, oh, well, I'll get a tax cut. Oh, well, we need to cut spending, waste, fraud, and abuse. My mother's Social Security isn't going to be there unless we do this, when it's the actual opposite of that. They're coming for Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare and the services that a whole hell of a lot of Trump supporters who live in red states rely on. There's no way to make the dramatic cuts that Donald Trump and Elon Musk, who's a total jackass and ignorant on how our government even works, to believe that they're going to cut $2 trillion by waste, fraud, and abuse. There's not even a dent to be made there. There's no way to even come close to accomplishing that without going after entitlements. And that is the third rail, or at least it had been. So as more people start to wake up and realize that their services that they've relied on and certain things that they've paid into won't be there anymore, I think you're going to see some more pushback by Republican senators who do, in fact, know better. I mean, there's a lot of House members that know better too, which is why they don't want to have their town halls anymore, because they're being confronted by their own constituents. But those folks, there's only a handful. There's only 3-seat difference here. 3 seats, and there are 3 special elections going on. And this should be a rallying call if Democrats want to have any opportunity to try to derail or at least make it more difficult for Republicans to do this.
Tara's exactly right. I remember back in 1995 when Newt Gingrich proposed a budget and I remember sitting in Dick Gephardt's office. We said, how are we going to deal with this? And we came up with the idea of saying $250 billion in tax cuts for the wealthy, paid for by $250 billion of cuts in Medicare. And it was devastating for Bob Dole, who had to go along with it for a while. It was devastating for the Republicans heading into 1996. And I think it will be equally devastating if they actually move forward with this in the 2026 midterms. They'll be like 2018.
All right. Although I'm hearing, I think, 3 undertones to say, yeah, but they're not gonna. So, Tara, I think you're saying if they do it, it's suicide, it's third rail, etc. And I think the fairy dust Weisberg thesis is holding here, that there's going to be some kind of monkeying around and the Senate will take ownership of it. But even so, back to Stockman, the numbers are pretty hard to monkey with. Certainly, you can't do it at the margins. You know, if you gave truth serum now to John Thune or Mike Johnson, what would they say is a potential deal that could happen? And I'll just add the slight complication that we have until March 14th until there's a potential of a whole new shutdown.
What I think they'll do, Harry, is they will make substantial cuts to food stamps and to Medicaid. So they will go after programs that benefit poor people. And I think Trump will go along with that, and they will exaggerate the fiscal significance of those cuts, although the human consequence of those cuts will be very large indeed. And I think that will stay within Trump's guidelines of not touching Medicare, which would be the more politically dangerous thing to do. And, I think they can pass a very harmful, dangerous budget that doesn't accomplish anything significant in terms of deficit reduction, but meets Trump's criteria. And, I think they can probably keep the coalition together by doing that.
And devastates, literally, well, of anecdote after anecdote, so many poor people, including MAGA people. Okay, so that's not leisure demand. That's just tough medicine paid for by the poor.
If I were advising the Democrats, and I hope that they get their acts together on this, they need to do what Republicans would do, which is find the most extreme stories and start trotting out kids with cancer, old folks that are getting thrown out of their nursing homes, because guess what? Medicaid pays for a lot of nursing home facilities. They need to really start putting faces and stories to what these devastating cuts will do. And that will be a lot more difficult for them to defend. And then, I mean, they will, because there is no depth to the depravity of MAGA. The cruelty is the point. They don't care. But when we talk about midterm elections and trying to get them out of power because the margins are so close in the House, it will be very difficult to ignore the actual physical pain that will happen to so many people, including Trump's own constituents. This is asymmetrical political warfare here. Democrats should be leaning into telling Trump supporters, Donald Trump did this to you. Donald Trump did this to you. And remind them, same thing with veterans, what they're doing to the veterans. Never in the history of America has a president of the United States ever abandoned our farmers or our veterans. Veterans are the most popular demographic in the country, more popular than George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, or Mother Teresa. Okay. So, and that's a fact. You can Google it. But start reversing the narrative, take control of it, and go on offense on this, because they're being handed political manna from heaven to go after Republicans going into these midterms with what they're trying to do. DOGE was the first thing, right? DOGE is a made-up thing. It's an illegal department. What they're doing to federal workers is insane, and it's not going to make a damn bit of difference in the dent for deficit spending. It doesn't matter.
Sarah, you're really good. I would like to put you in charge of communications on this. I think you frame this incredibly well.
I mean, but do you want to know why, Jacob?
You used to be a Republican.
It's because I was a Republican for 27 years. We know how to do this.
Yeah. Well, Bob Shrum was no piker at this in his day. But what I worry about is the difference now is that we are in a world of information bubbles, of a completely polarized media environment where there's no shared truth, there's no shared facts. And that message, as much as Democrats might do as good a job as you just did framing that and putting it out, I worry it just doesn't get heard by the right people.
Well, there's ways to do that.
Well, can I say it gets the right people get hurt? Because Medicaid, while we think it's just for the poor, in a lot of these congressional districts, I think David Valadio's district, it may be like 40% of the people in that district are on Medicaid. He narrowly skates by in these elections. He doesn't want to face the kind of argument that Tara was making a few minutes ago and have to go through a whole campaign on the defensive about this.
How many veterans are on food stamps?
Yep.
There's a lot of veterans that, their families, they don't make a lot of money, and they supplement their income with food stamps, with the SNAP program. I mean, people have no idea.
SNAP's going to get ravaged, right? Everyone seems to agree there.
I think it's going to all be fairy dust.
What do you mean, Bob? What do you mean exactly?
I think at the end of the day, caught between all of these difficult choices, the Republicans are going to say something like I said early in the program, well, we don't have to score this in terms of deficit reduction because we're just going to make the existing tax regime permanent and try to get away with it without doing these deep cuts in Medicare or Medicaid. There is something at the heart of the Republican Party that has always yearned to cut Social Security and Medicare, and now Medicaid. And if they get hoist on that petard, they're in deep trouble in the next election.
Just ask George Bush, right? And as soon as George Bush won a re-election, the first thing they tried to do was reform, which they need to be reformed. We all know this. I mean, they're on unsustainable paths, but how you do that is very politically tricky. This ain't the way to do it. Okay.
In general, Trump has been doing the outrageous things and been indifferent to it. And the R's in the House and Senate have been going along. In fact, let's move to this town meeting phenomenon where you have some Republicans showing up and getting the tar kicked out of them. You have some not showing up. Then you have Mike Johnson saying it's all rent-a-mob by Democrats. But they're facing actual political pushback now in a way that before they diverted onto Trump. So, does it have actual punch?
Oh, yeah. Like it's twofold, because how insulting is it to regular everyday folks who actually are doing their civic duty and going to these town halls and talking to their elected representatives, to be called out by Mike Johnson as being astroturf or fake or paid protesters. Like, yeah, that is just such an insult. And I would lean more into it and say, how dare you, if I were the folks who are organizing these things. And if these Republicans decide that they don't want to hold town halls anymore, you go and you hold them anyway and take a trick out of their own book and put an empty chair like Clint Eastwood did at the convention back in 2012 and say that my congressman so-and-so would not come and talk to us as constituents. He works for us. We pay his paycheck and he's not here. He's a coward. What are you afraid of? Why are you afraid of us? Who do you think employs you? That's what they need to do.
She is good, isn't she? And also on the other side are the people who are really being affected in a human way. Their kids now can't get the treatment they need, etc.
I was going to say in 2009, 2010, these town meetings were a warning sign of what was about to happen in the 2010 midterm elections. And Mike Johnson may want to say it's all phony, it's all cooked up, it's the liberals sending people. But if you get rid of the sort of MAGA biased polls, and you look at what's happened, the president's approval rating has gone down pretty substantially since Inauguration Day. So I think there are these warning signs, and I don't know how they deal with it other than to come up with some way to just say, we're going to cut taxes for the rich. We said we were going to do that. We promised the billionaires who supported us that we would do that, but we're not going to cut Medicare. And Medicaid will get some waste and fraud and maybe some work requirements. But I can't see them. I mean, if they go down this road and really cut Medicare, for example, or really cut Medicaid, there's going to be enormous human suffering, number one, but there's going to be a huge political backlash. What they've done foreign aid, by the way, there were already people in camps on the Thai border, Uyghurs who have fled China. Some have died because we've withdrawn medical care for them. Or how about George W. Bush's one great achievement, in my view, which was PEPFAR, to fight AIDS in Africa. And right now, that program appears to be gummed up. And if that happens, you will see hundreds of thousands of avoidable deaths.
And it's all caught up, by the way, in the courts, which is a whole theme here that I could speak to. Let's take it. Okay, so we'll see what happens. There's some kind of, smoke and mirrors, I think, in the immediate future. I wanted to just follow up on Jacob's point and take this as a sort of out question, less about the budget and more about the Republican Party now and how it is seemingly exploiting this, I call it silo phenomenon, the ways that the Republicans are isolated and how they get their news. So Jason Lincoln's in the New Republic. I don't know if you saw that article, but he said there's a whole new conception of what it means to be a Republican congressperson that's taking shape. Forget the Romneys, the diligent wonks. It's all little Javerts running Star Chamber investigations in these weaponized committees and alongside an army of what are essentially internet trolls, just producing content for an increasingly low-minded media economy. That's a little supercilious. Can I use a supercilious word to describe it? Our discussions, I think, naturally proceed from traditional views of political motivations and upsides, downsides, but, maybe it's a totally transformed Republican Party in terms of what they're actually trying to get done or what it means to them to flourish and at least hang in there. Thoughts?
I just think that's increasingly the reality, and it's invisible in a lot of important ways. You can only get information through your own filters, and you don't see other people's filters, and you have the insight into them here and there, but it's very hard to see how MAGA supporters are experiencing everything that's going on. And I certainly don't mean to create any false equivalence. I think the legacy media, establishment media, call it what you want, has certain, standards and has a dedication to relationship to reality that we don't see on the other side. But we are all in different kinds of bubbles these days. And I think a big worry is that, first of all, these Republicans in Congress, you're talking about, perceive their interests really differently than the way we might argue that they exist. They might be much less worried than we think about losing seats to Democrats in a midterm election, although many of them quite likely will. They may be much more worried about what Trump can do to them, what Mike Johnson can do to them, what being challenged from the right, what right-wing donors are going to do.
Fox News.
Yeah, or worse than Fox News. I mean, I got to say, Fox News this week stood up for the AP. Fox News, compared to a lot of the alternative media, has actually a sense of public responsibility. I heard Brett Baer talking about this week about how the White House Correspondents Association should be the one to decide who gets to fly in Air Force One and cover the White House, as it's always been. They're problematic, but they are still have the values of a news organization in many important respects. So does, weirdly enough, Newsmax.
Here's the underlying problem in addition to silos. There aren't a lot of people auditioning for profiles in courage in the current Republican Congress. Take Bill Cassidy, who's a doctor, senator from Louisiana. He voted for Robert Kennedy to confirm Robert Kennedy at HHS, even though he thinks that Kennedy's views are weird and dangerous to public health. I think he was very worried, and this goes to what Jacob said, about getting a Trump-sponsored primary against him. So he said, okay, in the end, he promised me he won't get rid of vaccines. I'll vote for him. The truth is, Cassidy's going to get a primary anyway.
That's correct.
He voted to remove Donald Trump from office during the second impeachment in early 2021. So if you're in that situation, you might as well stand up for what you believe in. But nobody seems, or very few people seem willing to do that.
Right, not just him, right? Ernst with Hegseth.
Collins and Murkowski, I mean, they voted at least the right way on a couple, but also did not on others. And because Collins is worrying about being primaried also, because God forbid, they can't imagine life not in the Senate. I've said this many times, and for those who know, part of the reason why I quit the Republican Party was because no one stood up when we needed to. I mean, it was Bill Buckley who said that conservatives were supposed to be the ones to yell stop athwart history when no one else would. And I actually believed that. Silly me. And so that's what I've been doing since Donald Trump came down the escalator, and still doing it. But I look at these people who have been around who know better. I blame the enablers. Donald Trump is who he is. The Republican enablers who are now collaborators in this mess that we're in, they are to blame because they could have stopped this multiple times. They could have stopped RFK Jr. People are going to die because of this. Okay, lives are going to be lost. We lost 1 million Americans during the pandemic unnecessarily because of the mishandling the first time around. And there you had guardrails. This time, we don't have them. And you look at Bill Cassidy's the perfect example that Bob used. He's a doctor who made his career well respected in the vaccine space, right? Like, what are you doing? It's more than just thinking that Robert Kennedy was going to be bad. He knows it. He knows it. I don't know why these Republicans keep thinking that if they sell out to Trump and they do what he wants, that somehow that earns them points. No, it doesn't. It never does.
Yeah, he really is the ultimate, what have you done for me lately?
Exactly. It never works out for you. So why not go out guns blazing then? At least stand up and do the right thing. And at least you can sleep at night knowing you're on the right side of history, not going down as a coward who sold the country out to Donald Trump and the rest of the cacistocracy that's going on here, that's ruining our country and literally going to cost lives, both home and abroad. It's astonishing. The silos of information part, which is kind of what started this part of the conversation, I think that there are ways. You have to meet people where they are. You have to meet them where they are. I think that's been a critical mistake that Democrats have made. Republicans for years began investing in the ecosystem that is now a behemoth. It's been decades in the making. How do I know? I was part of building it. So you look at talk radio, which transformed to podcasting, which the whole alternative media, now known as independent media, was dominated by the right wing and the extremists for years. And they figured it out. How about, you look at Joe Rogan. This is a guy who hosted a TV show where they ate bugs, okay, and then became a commentator for UFC. And then he became a podcaster where he talks about, manosphere, manly things. But guess what? Starts weaving in politics and cultural issues. Look at Barstool Sports. Same thing. It's supposed to be about sports, but they would weave in their right-wing propaganda. They have been planting the seeds for years. So Democrats need to start meeting people where they are and start leaning into investing in building these networks right now. The legacy media is not going to do it. They've already bowed, obeying in advance. They're not going to do it. It's going to take independent media sources where most people get their news out anyway, and investing in that and starting to meet people where they are, or else we're never going to be able to combat this. This is the greatest, most successful propaganda op in history that got Donald Trump elected again because of the disinformation and misinformation that has flourished for so long.
It's now time to take a moment for our sidebar feature, which explains some of the issues that are prominent in the news. Today's sidebar is dedicated to the late, great David Johansen, who generously took the time to help us understand one of the most notorious figures of the January 6th period, Jeffrey Clark, and his significance to the January 6th hearings. Besides wanting to do a tribute to David Joe, Jeffrey Clark has now resurfaced. He's expected to be nominated by Trump to be the White House's regulation czar in the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. That notwithstanding, still being subject to criminal indictment in different courts and having been sanctioned by the bar and criticized by the DOJ Inspector General for his role as an election denier. That episode, it seems to me, remains part of Donald Trump's psyche and still informs what's going on today, as most recently shown in the wigged-out tirade against Zelensky in the Oval Office. Best known for his tenure fronting the hugely influential New York Dolls, David Johansen is a true chameleon throughout the course of a career that has seen him transform from a proto-punk hero with the Dolls to performing jazz, lounge, and calypso. As Buster Poindexter, he's appeared in numerous acting roles, maybe best known for playing the ghost of Christmas Past in Scrooged, and throughout his versatile career, he remained a rock and roll original and an unpredictable iconoclast. All right, I give you David Johansen on Jeffrey Clark.
Who is Jeffrey Clark, and what role did he play in the 2020 election's big lie? Jeffrey Clark was an acting assistant attorney general, not one of the top officials at the Department of Justice. In the aftermath of the 2020 presidential election, Clark's attempts to further President Trump's efforts to invalidate the 2020 election stand as one of the most reprehensible and anti-constitutional derelictions of duty by a Department of Justice official in many years. In December 2020, Clark sent his DOJ superiors a letter he had drafted for the highest Georgia state officials. The draft asserted, falsely, that the department was investigating irregularities in the 2020 election that may have affected its outcome. Clark wanted the department's leading officials to sign the letter, as well as similar letters for other states. Before sending the letters, Clark had engaged in several conversations with Trump, who supported Clark's plan and was ready to appoint him the acting attorney general to execute it. At a tense 3-hour meeting on January 3rd, DOJ leadership told Trump it would resign en masse if he went through with the plan. Trump backed down. What improprieties and crimes might Clark have committed? They fall into 3 categories: violations of DOJ rules, violations of legal ethics rules, and federal crimes. DOJ officials preclude discussions of investigations with anyone in the White House, including the president. They also forbid taking any significant action near in time to an election that could influence that election. Finally, they preclude comment on pending investigations that have not reached charging decisions. The DOJ Office of the Inspector General is currently investigating Clark's possible violation of these rules. Bar rules applicable to lawyers like Clark forbid dishonest and misrepresentative behavior, including recklessly false statements. Lawyers are forbidden under ethical rules from engaging in conduct that seriously interferes with the administration of justice. Finally, Clark may have committed federal crimes, as alleged in a pending lawsuit brought by the Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. First provisions of the Hatch Act make it a crime to try to coerce federal employees to engage in political activity. Second, civil rights law provisions make it a crime to conspire to oppress or threaten anyone in the free exercise of the right to vote. For Talking Feds, I'm David Johansen.
Thank you so much, and rest in peace, David Johansen, a great, generous, and wide-ranging artist. To get a sense of him in his later days, you can look at the Martin Scorsese movie, Personality Crisis, One Night Only, from 2023, or take a moment to go back and listen to his great albums with the New York Dolls, who were punk before punk was punk, in the mid-70s in New York City. All right, it is now time for a spirited debate brought to you by our sponsor, Total Wine and More. Each episode, you'll be hearing an expert talk about the pros and cons of a particular issue in the world of wine, spirit, and beverages.
Thank you, Harry. In today's spirited debate, we unbottle the truth about wine. Is there really a right or a wrong way to enjoy it? Wine drinkers near and far have lived by a certain set of written yet unofficial rules to follow, particularly when it comes to pairing wine and food. You've heard a couple of them before. White wine pairs with seafood, red wine pairs with big old juicy steaks. And while we like to think of these more as guidelines than rules, some suggestions actually do serve a higher purpose to help your wine get the most from your dish, and vice versa. One pairing that's not quite as obvious involves tannins. Tannins are the dryness that you taste and feel in wine. They come from grape seeds, skin, or oak barrels. Traditionally, high tannin wines and spicy foods don't pair well together. The dry components of the wine become more pronounced with spice, which makes the food itself taste even hotter than it actually is. From drinking red wine with fish to white wine with beef, we say, you do you. But there is one no-no that we wholeheartedly live by. Always, yes, always, hold your glass by the stem and not the bulb. And there are a few reasons why. Putting your warm hands on the bulb transfers unnecessary heat to the wine. As wine warms up, it will become off balance and you will taste the alcohol more and more. Not to mention, you can easily avoid smudges to your beautiful glassware. To truly enjoy wine, you can never go wrong pairing the wonderful selection and helpful guides at Total Wine & More. Cheers.
Thanks to our friends at Total Wine and More for today's A Spirited Debate. All right, and there's a real exclamation point to that part of the conversation, as you say, and it also makes latent a whole different podcast on what exactly are the Dems doing. But, you know, I couldn't agree more. I'll just make the point that Jacob did about the false equivalence, because I do think it was a very concerted, very lucratively funded campaign, and it was about acquisition of power over truth. And, you know, do you do the parallel there or not? But, as said, we do not have guardrails. Many of them are gone. However, we do have Elon Musk. So let's now move to the increasingly odd, I'd say unprecedented sort of co-presidency. So, increasingly unpopular, billionaire, but tempestuous, unsteady, downright strange. And the one objection that seems to me to be getting the most purchase is his access to people's personal data. I sort of serve up a general question to anyone about Musk, but with this wrinkle, which is easy enough to see why Musk wants to mince about at the cabinet meetings and be in charge. What's in it for Trump? Why is he behind him now, even in this latest tension with the cabinet? Why does he want to make him the effective CEO, I guess, of the government?
Well, he spent $280 million, I think, to help Trump get elected.
That was then. What have you done for me lately?
X became a very powerful engine for promoting Trump as well. So I think that's one part of it. The other part of it is, I think that Donald Trump respects folks who have a lot of money. I don't mean kind of average rich folks, people who have humongous amounts of money. And he doesn't have an ideology, in my view.
Trump.
Yeah, I mean,
That's right.
he's driven. He would have been happy to run as a Democrat if the Democrats would have had him.
Didn't he try that already?
Yeah.
Flirted with that. It was
Pro-choice
the
Democrat.
Democrats, right?
Yeah.
And then the Green Party, I think, or People's Party or some nonsense back in 2000.
Yeah, he was going to do the Green Party. But my point is, he doesn't have a set of beliefs, but Musk is kind of running the government, to the extent he is running it, the way Trump ran a lot of those casinos. I mean, centralized decision-making, no process, one person just making the decisions. And I think Trump's totally comfortable with that. Everybody says, he has all this experience as a businessman. He's run businesses. No, he hasn't. He's been a real estate investor, and a lot of his investments went belly up.
Including the casinos. Who the hell bankrupts casinos?
And also Musk, a visionary guy, but he's obviously not a nuts and bolts executive.
No, Elon Musk is not a genius. Elon Musk is not an engineer. He's not a scientist. He's none of these things. He was born into wealth in a Nazi-adjacent family in apartheid South Africa, and who were involved in very shady mineral mines and diamond mine businesses or whatever they were doing, and basically bought his way into influence and then became the biggest welfare queen in America because it was our tax dollars that subsidized his failing companies, SpaceX, Tesla. We're the ones that subsidized his companies, particularly SpaceX. So, and now today, he has hundreds of contracts with the United States government, making $8 million a day, while our seniors live on $65 a day on Social Security. And we're supposed to believe that this guy has the best interest of the American people at heart, that he doesn't have any conflicts of interest.
By the way, hundreds plus one, this FAA contract.
Right, I was just about to say.
Ousting Verizon from you.
Right, ousting Verizon. I mean, we all agree the FAA needs an upgrade. That's great. But we also have a process for that. It's called procurement. It's called bidding for contracts. And so that you avoid this kind of quid pro quo cronyism that happens in banana republics and authoritarian regimes or oligarchies like Russia. That's not how it works in America. Elon Musk isn't from here. He grew up in apartheid South Africa. He doesn't appreciate how our government works. He doesn't care. He's the richest guy in the world. And the president of the United States has given him carte blanche to come in with a chainsaw. Ha, ha, ha. Did you see him jumping around like a jackass at CPAC with a chainsaw? These are people's real lives. Our government actually is a thing that used to be the pride of the world that is now being literally decapitated by a guy who has nothing but conflicts of interest, who has, like you said, strange is an understatement, but is doing this with reckless abandon with the sign off of the president of the United States. You know why? Because Donald Trump can use him as a foil. So Elon Musk gets all the heat when all of this goes awry, and then Donald Trump can go, well, it was Elon. He's backing him now because we all know that he doubles and triples down, even when he's dead wrong, because that's the Roy Cohn method of you never admit you're wrong. You double down on it. So that's what he's doing. But we have yet to see the full fallout from what Elon Musk is doing to our government and to the people who, like when the economy goes into a recession or crashes, or when the national parks aren't open, or he sells them off to Saudi Arabia to pay for a sovereign wealth fund. I mean, the American people are really about to be in the F around and find out stage. The find out stage is coming, and Elon Musk is going to be right at the center of it.
Well, if Elon Musk were not a billionaire and he was someone you knew, friends and family would be having a serious conversation about this person having a dangerous manic episode and, asking what drugs is he taking? Is he bipolar? The next step would be, can we have this person committed? And what the professionals would tell you, well, are they a danger to themselves or others? And Elon Musk, I'm not sure how much of a danger he is to himself, although I think he is, his, Tesla's sort of about to fall apart while he's doing all this. But boy, is he a danger to others. I mean, he's a danger to others all over the country and all over the world. And he's only empowered by Trump. Trump is an agent of chaos. But in Elon Musk, he's found someone who's a step beyond that. He's an agent of destruction. And I think Trump is sort of tipping his hat to him and saying, wow, here's someone who goes even farther than I would go. And I kind of like this, one, because I love chaos, and because there's a fundamental anarchism or nihilism at the heart of all this in terms of a governing philosophy. But I think Trump is just relishing the open-ended damage that Musk is doing. It's funny, Terry, you alluded to the McCarthy period. That's a really, really relevant analogy right now, because McCarthy, although lots of people didn't like it, including the president, Dwight Eisenhower, and lots of people in his own party, not until he became vulnerable in a certain way and the courage rose to a certain level was there a successful effort to challenge him. And Musk is going to go on with his chainsaw, just destroying things until the Republicans stop him. When that will be, I do not know.
Although there's been a little pushback, right? Tom Tillis said, you got to do something about this guy. I mean, he really, I don't know if you credit Trump with some kind of charisma or some ability to connect with some voters, but it does seem to me, in addition to not being any kind of executive, this is sort of psychological cant, but the guy's got no emotional intelligence, right? He laughs at the wrong times, and he's got, weird kind of tirades and nastiness and stuff. It does seem like he's pretty unpopular, and again, at the very narrow margins we're working through.
And unstable. This is an unstable guy. I mean, we saw that before this, right? I mean, you wouldn't let this guy be in charge of a lemonade stand.
But so this thesis about agent of destruction, that's a really provocative way to think about it.
Look, he did not start Tesla.
Correct.
He took it over from the people who had the vision to see that you could do this and you might transform the world and transportation. What's happening right now, and Jacob alluded to this, is Tesla's sales in Europe are down, for example, by 45%.
And there's protests in front of Tesla stores everywhere.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. And you had a board of directors that was living up to its fiduciary responsibility, in addition to whatever the family might want to do, as Jacob put it. You'd be saying, you can't do this stuff politically because it's hurting our brand. I mean, I know people who've gotten rid of their Teslas. There's also a bumper sticker that's popular, at least here in LA, saying, don't blame me, I bought it before I knew.
Here in the DC area too, the local news did a whole thing on this movement of Tesla owners who have these bumper stickers. So it's listen, you can protest that way too. Good. I met someone at a dinner last week in DC who was driving a Cybertruck, and a bunch of us rolled our eyes because we were like, oh, we figured this guy was a tech bro jerk like Elon and the rest of them. And turned out he actually was not. Bought his Cybertruck way before Elon was involved in any of this stuff, and turned out to be the loveliest human being. And we're all going to go have drinks one day.
With the ugliest car, though, I gotta say.
Yeah, it is the ugliest
anyone
car
tunes
on the
in for
road.
that. It's hideous,
it is awful.
right?
It's awful. Looks like something from Mad Max. But, I mean, it's just that, I would just like to remind folks, though, in the McCarthy era, it was a woman senator, Margaret Chase Smith, who stood up.
At long last, sir, yeah.
Who stood up at a time when there were virtually no women in the Senate. And she stood up to do the right thing. So, I run a women's organization. So we carry the burdens on our backs a little heavier and have stepped into this country in more ways than one, even when our country didn't love us back. So
there you go. The Seneca Project. We've talked a fair bit about Republican strategy, just as we've explored the news of the week. So the Democrats, right? You heard the James Carville, Brer Rabbit strategy. The collapse is already underway. Let's just let the ball come to you. We don't need to be aggressive now. It is a real challenge. I remember this in 94 when I was working in government, because everything has to be sort of guerrilla tactics or unofficial and the like, but I certainly know a lot of concerned folks who think that the Dems need to be, figuring out ways to be taking the fight, at least public, as a matter of PR, to the other side. What do you think?
Well, I think you're going to see more and more pushback from the Dems. I think it's going to be along the lines of what Gephardt and the Democrats were doing after Gingrich took over the Congress. It's going to be cutting taxes for billionaires and paying for it by cutting health care for ordinary people. I mean, that is a powerful message. I think that what Trump did is he came in, and this phrase has been used a lot, he flooded the zone. I mean, executive order after executive order after executive order. But now I think we're beginning to see all of this boil down to a couple of big issues. One is the healthcare issue I just mentioned. The other is Musk and people's privacy and what's going to happen to the federal government. So I think you'll see more and more of it. Now, what I believe James, who is my friend, was and has been for 40 years, was really saying is Democrats shouldn't panic because Republicans and MAGA are creating enough trouble for themselves. He's not saying that you don't move in at the right moment and really push the argument so that you close the deal with voters.
Yeah, I mean, you could call that, Bob, the rope-a-dope strategy. Let them, tire themselves, wear themselves out. I just don't think that's the moment we're in. I think that the cruelty and the destruction are so severe and of such historic dimensions in terms of the American government that there's just a moral responsibility to kind of fight them everywhere you can. And, I think the Democrats have been flummoxed, thrown into disarray, whatever you want. I mean, and Trump has flooded the zone. It's going to stay flooded. He's very good at doing that. And Democrats just have to regroup and fight back where they can. I think Trump will harm himself given time, but I don't want to sit around waiting for it.
Let me tell you what, I love James Carville, and I've often referred back to his ability to know how to brawl in politics and have said that Democrats should be taking more pages out of that book from the Carville of the 90s and my good friend Paul Begala. But I disagree with him on this too. Defense may win championships, offense wins elections. There is no time to be sitting around waiting for the other side to mess up. You just cannot. To Jacob's point, the swiftness in which our democracy is being dismantled from both directions, from the bottom up and the top down, requires a resistance of epic proportions that I don't know that the Democrats are fully prepared to assemble. It's been very frustrating to watch because it's not like a lot of us didn't warn that this would happen. They gave us an entire playbook of what they were going to do, the MAGAs, if they were back in power. It's called Project 2025. They were so audacious that they wrote it down. Okay. So it's not like nobody saw this coming. They mean what they say. So for Democrats to be caught this flat-footed has been one of the most incredibly frustrating parts of watching all of this. However, there have been some exceptions. There have been some bright spots like Jasmine Crockett and AOC, who I didn't agree with on anything policy-wise and probably still don't. But at least she knows how to communicate and knows how to fight back and use tactics from the 21st century. And same thing with Jasmine Crockett. People are looking for fighters. I think Hakeem Jeffries and some of the Democratic leadership has been entirely too cautious. There is no time for that. There is literally no time. Republicans never stop. There is no such thing as an off year. I don't want to hear any Democrats saying it's the off year. No, it isn't. Back 20 years ago, we could say they were off years. In the era of MAGA, they do not stop. They are like domestic terrorists. They're like the American Taliban. They're very patient, methodical, well-organized, and they don't stop. So we can't either. And until the Democratic establishment understands this, regular folks are going to feel frustrated by where's the lack of, where's the action? There's a lack of action. Where's the aggression? And I don't know what it's going to take. I don't know what it's going to take to light a fire under the ass of the Democratic establishment to finally break away from the old things, but you got to play the game that you're in. And that game requires offense every freaking day. Take a page out of the Tea Party tactics, not their policies, the tactics. Republicans were in the minority. They made Barack Obama's life and Democrats' lives very difficult when they were in power. There are ways to do this, and that's what they need to do right now.
Tara, I think they will.
I hope so. They better get moving.
I may be the minority here, speaking of minorities, but I think there are more and more logs being put on that fire, and you're going to see Democrats fight back pretty hard. I mean, Chris Murphy from Connecticut has done a terrific job.
He has. Ryan Schatz from Senator Schatz from Hawaii, too.
And I think you're going to see more and more and more of this.
The thing about Murphy, who I think is making a bit for sort of national prominence, this is my own sort of, nerdy way of looking at things, but I've been dismayed at what seems to me the most important degradations that he is in the process of implementing have to do with the constitutional structure, rule of law, the really basic stuff that distinguishes us less and less every week from, say, Hungary. So that's my little, corner of this world, but it does feel like, man, Murphy is an exception, maybe Jamie Raskin, but it's a tough road to hoe. And, the thing that's getting purchased is you can't let Musk get at your data, and there's going to be some economic, price of eggs today, never been higher in the U.S. I don't know if you have thoughts, but I feel really challenged trying to bring home the import of what I see as the broad, constitutional stakes.
Harry, the problem isn't that no Democrats are challenging him. There's a good list of Democrats who are, doing a very effective job on different issues and are standing up. The problem is it doesn't feel like a coordinated strategy led by the party as a whole. It's individual voices, but it doesn't feel like a concentrated, strategic, effective plan. And Bob, I hope you're right. I hope it's coming. But when? How soon?
The vaunted bench that people start talking about when Biden stepped aside, many people there strikes me, have been particularly reticent to be out front.
Well, not J.B. Pritzker.
Yeah, that's true.
I understand people's frustrations. I totally share the frustrations. I think Jacob's right, Tara's right, you're right. I do believe that in the coming months, we will see a much more concerted Democratic pushback that will be strategically driven.
Led by whom?
Well, we don't have a single spokesperson. And although I think Hakeem Jeffries is really good when he gets up and argues, he doesn't yet seem to have gotten where Nancy Pelosi got when she drove a very powerful Democratic message going into 2018. But we'll get there, I'm pretty sure. And it will be a diversity of voices, hopefully prosecuting a unified strategy.
They should take a page out of how they prosecuted the impeachment, the second one, and how they did the January 6th committee hearings.
And how they did Gingrich when the Gingrich revolution was underway.
That's correct. I was on the other side of that, and I can tell you that there are ways that you can coordinate your messaging. And they had an opportunity to do that during the confirmation hearings for the cabinet officials, and they blew it. They blew it because people were too busy trying to give soliloquies and score political points instead of having a coordinated message hammering home how horrible and dangerous these nominees were, from Kash Patel to RFK to Pete Hegseth. I mean, there were some bright spots, at least in the Hegseth pushback, but like Kash Patel as our FBI director, you've got to be kidding me. That hearing was insane. Tulsi Gabbard, they should have prosecuted it the same way they did the January 6th committee hearings and the impeachment. But that's in the past now. I hope that they can figure out where it's going to come from. I don't know if it's the new DNC leadership or what, but they've got to get it together and fast.
All right. Much, much more to come. And to Bob's point, it's been, 7 weeks? So in part, this is just, I think, Democrats feeling a little flat-footed at what has been quite a aggressive Project 2025 driven agenda. All righty. Out of time, except for our Talking Five feature where we take a question from a listener and we each have to answer in 5 words or fewer. And today's question is, It's still playing out in tension within the cabinet, but Elon Musk wants to send emails to everyone in the government. I think a few went to the judicial branch, saying, what were the 5 things you accomplished last week? So the question is, what's the best answer to the Elon Musk email of 5 words or fewer?
Did not surrender to despair.
More than 5 words. Take a page from Stephen Young, the former senator, Democratic senator from Alaska, who used to write to constituents who sent him crazy mail. I think you should know that someone is sending out crazy letters and signing your name.
That's great. Well, I have my 5, and it's very on brand for me, which would be F off, this is illegal.
There you go. And I have a milder version of the same. I'm embarrassed to say that's always the risk here. But mine is none of your friggin' business. Thank you so much, Tara, Bob, and Jacob. And thank you very much, listeners, for tuning in to Talking Feds. If you like what you've heard, please tell a friend to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or wherever they get their podcasts. And please take a moment to rate and review this podcast. You can also now subscribe to us on YouTube, where we are posting full episodes, talking books, conversations, and bonus video content. Check us out on our Substack at Talking Feds Substack, where I'll be posting 2 or 3 bulletins a week, focusing on breaking down the various threats out there to constitutional norms and the rule of law. And you can follow us on Twitter at Talking Feds Pod, or follow me on Blue Sky. And you can look to see our latest offerings on Patreon. Talking Feds remains a completely independent production. So if you like the work we do and are inclined to support the show, joining our Patreon is the best way to do it. And Talking Feds has joined forces with The Contrarian. I'm a founding contributor to the bold new media venture, committed to reviving the diversity of opinion that feels increasingly rare in today's news landscape. But rest assured, Talking Feds remains the same scrappy, independent podcast that you've come to know and trust, just now linked up with an ambitious and vital project designed for this pivotal moment in our nation's legal and political discourse. And with co-founder Norm Eisen outdoing yeoman's work and heavy lifting in various courts challenging Trump's executive orders, I will be pinch hitting for him over the next 3 days with editor-in-chief of The Contrarian, Jen Rubin, giving you the morning scoop from The Contrarian's vantage point, so you can check that out today, tomorrow, and Wednesday. Find out more about all the great features at The Contrarian at contrarian.substack.com. Thanks for tuning in, and don't worry, as long as you need answers, the Feds will keep talking. Talking Feds is produced by Catherine Devine. Our associate producer is Becca Havian. Sound engineering by Matt McArdle. Rosie Don Griffin, David Lieberman, Hamza Mahadranathan, Emma Maynard, and Hallie Necker are our contributing writers, and production assistants by Akshaj Turbailu and Sebastian Navarro. Our music, as ever, is by the amazing Philip Glass. Thank you 1,000 times again to David Johansen for explaining who Jeffrey Clark is, why he's a figure who still matters as January 6th still matters to the country, and for a great, great body of work and a great life that ended this week at age 75. Talking Feds is a production of Dolito LLC. I'm Harry Littman. Talk to you later.